Welcome to This Morning on Asakhe podcast, your daily dose of insightful conversation on current affairs, politics, and social issues. Please share and also follow us on social media at SiteZW. Now, stay tuned to today's episode.
A very good morning to you guys. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Asakhe Online Spaces. My name is Brighton. But today on the show, we're looking at the issue of Gukurahundi. Is Zimbabwe ready to solve Gukurahundi? And good morning to you, Noshanka, this morning.
Good morning, Brighton, and good morning to our guests.
Joining us this morning is Professor Moyo to help us unpick that, and also Zenzele and also Dr. Mandlenkosi Mpofu to help us understand more about the issue of Gukurahundi. Is Zimbabwe ready to solve Gukurahundi? Remember on Sunday, there was the launch of the Gukurahundi outreach programs. To start speaking around this issue this morning is going to be Zenzele to give us a background of what has been done over the past years of not only the NPRC, you have done the Chiambaka report and so on. Good morning to you, Zenzele, this morning.
Good morning, Brighton, and good morning, Nonhlanhla, and of course the guests that we're going to be having this morning, all protocol observed. All these years that I've been, researching about Gukurahundi, I know we a lot have been said about, we might differ in what happened, how it happened, and all those kind of things. But the things that we agree on, and I think almost everyone agrees that Gukurahundi happened. It is a historical fact. It happened. We also agree that we need to find a solution or to resolve the issue of Gukurahundi. We might differ on how we need to go about it. So those are the two important things that I think we need to look at. Gukurahundi started around immediately after 1980. Started in the Zipra camps, and then it went to civilians. But when it started, we saw NGOs. I think Oxfam was one of the first NGOs to write a dossier to the president saying this was happening and putting a list of the people who were being killed in Cholocho and naming them and all those kind of things. Then when the Catholic churches were making representations on what was happening, the diplomats then writing reports, and the journalists, foreign media writing reports about what happened. Then we saw the Zimbabwe Commission. So this is why you see in the early 80s, you first of all have the first phase of Gukurahundi where people are burnt in houses and blah, blah, blah. Then the soldiers are withdrawn, retrained. Then they are deployed in Mat South, where you then come up with concentration camps, people disappearing, Palagwe. So there were the variations in terms of methods. But when that happens, there is the Zimbabwe Commission. And the Zimbabwe Commission writes its reports. We know the report didn't happen. But what was interesting is that even back then, during the Zimbabwe Commission, journalists were allowed to go in those hearings. I've seen a number of reports that were done by journalists who attended the hearings. And I hope in 2024, media will be allowed to cover these hearings. Then after the Zimbabwe Commission, the report was not released. There seemed to be a time of silence, especially after 1987, early 90s. People were talking about it, but it's talking in tongues. Then we see the rise of Imbovane, activism in the late 90s. That's where Imbovane talk about issue, the public meetings, Wabizo, Innocent Kala, and the other guys. Then it resulted in a committee that went and met Mugabe. And at that particular time, I think it was around 1998, where President Mugabe said it was a moment of madness. And at that time, there was something that was happening behind the closed doors. The late former Magistrate Johnson Mkandla had gone to see Robert Mugabe, and they talked about solving the issue. And Mugabe had promised Johnson Mkandla that in the 1998 budget, he had instructed Herbert Murerwa to put a budget to compensate the victims of Gukurahundi. And there's still a story, that was written by the Chronicle in 1998, and it was Brezhnev Malava who wrote the story, and they were talking about victims of Gukurahundi being compensated. Somehow that committee fizzled out. 99, after the death of Joshua Nkomo, there was a committee which was set up at Davis Hall within ZANU-PF, or Oskanyiso Moyo, Dumiso Tabengwa. They tried to come up with a committee to resolve the issue of Gukurahundi. Then came the emergence of MDC, and that committee somehow did not manage to achieve. Around that particular time as well, President Robert Mugabe met about 42 chiefs, and that was in Duna, where he tasked the chiefs to go out in the communities, consult the people, and come up with the names of the people who had been affected by Gukurahundi. And we don't know what happened. Then we saw now around 2016, 2017, the emergence of Matabeleland Collective. Matabeleland Collective was a grouping of over quite a lot organizations in Bulawayo who came up with what we call Matabeleland Compendium. And within the compendium, there was the issue of the Gukurahundi, that they wanted Gukurahundi to be solved. How do we deal with it? Some of you remember that Jenny Williams was the chair and she was very active. There were somehow disagreements within the Matabeleland Collective, but before those disagreements, there was the first meeting which was done at State House. When the Matabeleland Collective went there, that's when this process starts, and the Matabeleland Collective divides. Then Jenny Williams remains and she runs with it. I don't know what happened to her. From the Matabeleland Collective comes the chiefs process, where now you have the chiefs and we are having the but people, you acknowledge that people like Bechunga Zulu have been doing a lot, doing memorial plaques. So many people have done a lot. Then there was the NPRC. There was the first NPRC which tried to have meetings and there were demonstrations. They went to communities. They had a lot of meetings, and they came up with a plan, and they said Gukurahundi was their priority. They wanted something to be done, and nothing came out of that. We now have the second NPRC, which of course its mandate is expired, OPED Kutu and all those kinds of things. As I end, I want to say I hope for me, this process is going to be, transparent, is going to be honest. People have always been accused, but we have heard that, people are using Gukurahundi to fundraise and blah, blah, blah. And Charumbira said the reason why these other commissions have failed is because they used foreigners or they had foreigners. But let's have transparency. When Charumbira presented the committees that were going to be going to the community and sending them off, he said that these guys have been equipped. They have laptops. And when I was sitting at home, I said, aha. So where is the tender? Now that was put out to a tender for the laptops. There are about 76 chiefs who will be having these meetings. So if that means there's a lot of equipment that has been bought. The laptops, the recorders, and who supplied the laptops? Because but they're accusing other people. And there will be a lot of how much has been set aside for Gukurahundi. Where is the budget? Who is the budget holder? How is the money going to be distributed? We now read in newspapers that there's going to be an archive center in Bulawayo. Who's going to be manning the archive center? And, I know Mapiza there's something called the Gukurahundi Committee. I'm saying there's something called the Gukurahundi Committee because when the media was invited to discuss Gukurahundi, the letter that I received came from the Gukurahundi Committee. And it was signed by Mapiza, what's her name, first name? Virginia Mapiza, who is now the Attorney General, who used to be the PEMSEC in the Ministry of Justice. So she's now the Attorney General, but she still runs, I think, the Gukurahundi Committee. So this committee, what is their legal status? But also, what are the resources that are being put in that committee? And who's managing them? So if we want to deal with this issue, this is the kind of transparency that we need. To say, guys, we've done this, so that at the end of the day, we don't have an outcome that is disputed. Lastly, I think if the president means it, and he really wants this issue to be solved, and I have no reason to believe that he doesn't want to, I think he needs to surround himself with people who are serious as well, who mean business. This issue will be, spoiled by the language of people who are around him. You cannot be talking peace and threatening people, and I don't think it's him who's threatening. It's his hanger-ons.
Thank you so much, Zenzele, for presentation. And up next, we have Dr. Mandlenkosi Mpofu. Good morning to you, Dr. Mpofu.
Good morning, Nonhlanhla. Is Zimbabwe ready? What do we mean by Zimbabwe when we say Zimbabwe ready to solve the Gukurahundi issue? Because clearly, it was the president and maybe it's his government who are leading this process. Do we mean the government of Zimbabwe? Because from what Zenzele said earlier, the history that he narrated, the government is probably the only entity in Zimbabwe that has prevented a resolution of the Gukurahundi genocide so far. Are they ready to permit that now? Because I think people in Matabeleland have always been ready and itching to have this resolved and not being allowed to do so. But is there that acceptance and that push in Zimbabwean society that brings us together as Zimbabweans to say, okay, this is an issue that is troublesome, not only to particular regions or to a particular region, but to all of us as Zimbabwe. I think it's the framework that will be set or that has been set by the government that will tell us whether they are ready. Is it possible to get that framework from the speeches that we got from the president, from the president of the Chiefs Council, and to the vice president, from the vice president of the Chiefs Council on Sunday? I'm not sure about that. But for me, I would say, let me look at 5 issues, maybe 5 pillars that have been used by others before that also I've reviewed, I and others have reviewed before in terms of setting that framework. The first one is the issue of accountability. And the second one is the issue of telling the truth, or some would say truth telling, or in this case, recovering the truth for the sake of the victims and the victims themselves, helping that to make sure that that is done. The third one is reconciliation. And then the fourth one is institutional reforms. And then finally, reparations. Are these issues that they don't have to be listed or itemized, but when we pick out from the agenda that was set, can we identify these? And by telling the truth, I think for a long time now, the victims of Gukurahundi have been praying for an opportunity to be heard, to speak and explain, narrate what happened to them. Many have died hoping to be afforded that opportunity. I think it is maybe 4 decades, very late, too late maybe, but it is still welcome. So the outreach program itself is welcome. But also when we say we need to tell the truth about this, my problem is that the focus, which is on victims and which I support, it leaves out that there are 2 sides if they are victims. There are victims and those who victimize. Some like to call them the perpetrators. Are we going to be able to hear that other side as well? And perpetrators here are problematic because we can say the perpetrator was the state. Will the state explain that this is what the state did? My concern here is that I think on Sunday, the president has an opportunity to at least recognize and acknowledge what happened. I think throughout some of the things that we have seen, the efforts that have been done before, there has never been what I can call a clear acknowledgement and recognition of what happened, and even of the failures of the state and of society between 1982 and 1987. For me, the problem with the utterances that we saw, and there are snippets of them all over our platforms, is what I call justificatory narratives, especially from the government and those who represent government. Whenever they explain Gukurahundi, they resort to these justificatory narratives that say, no, yes, people were victimized, a lot of bad things happened, but the language tends to clearly try to say, no, you have to understand why and how this happened, and not go beyond just clearly acknowledging and accepting responsibility for what happened. So for me, I think the promotion of such justificatory narratives has to end, because I think for many people, the government wants to wash its hands. You know, that Pontius Pilate style where they absolve themselves of the responsibility and the blame of what happened. They should not be focused on that. And then when it comes to narrating what happened, I think Zanzibar tried to, or rather explain that people have been doing so. Let us focus on the memorial plaques that Ipesh Ligazule has been erecting in Palakwe, for instance, for quite a long time. These plaques have consistently been destroyed. And Ipesh have been really also determined. They are destroyed, they come back again, they erect them, and the plaques are destroyed again. So I can say that the government has prevented telling the truth around Gukurahundi, or they have wanted the truth, only the kind of truth they want to hear to be told, and in a manner in which they appreciate. You cannot go around and tell your own truth. that would not be allowed. So I think from this, we can maybe finally, we can say that there is a level of intolerance to anyone who tells the truth in a way that authorities do not like one. And maybe finally, let me stop here and say, let us ask ourselves, is it possible to resolve gross injustices like the Gukurahundi genocide when many of those who committed those atrocities are still in charge of the state? That readiness has to confront that as well. That, okay, if the government is ready, is it ready to allow this to be done, notwithstanding the fact that those who are directing it and those who are part of it, part of our society, many of them are still viewed, and maybe rightly so as well, as having part of the perpetrators, but who also still have the power to decide what can be done and what cannot be done. I think I may end there, but let me just say something in terms of what came out in some of the speeches on Sunday. Some of them are very problematic for me. Like, I'll just quote from the Vice President of the Chiefs Council. He said, we are lucky because we have been blessed by the President. And this is what he said was the instruction from the President. He said, this Gukurahundi thing is mine as the President. I own it and the Chiefs Council. I do not want anyone else interfering. I'm not sure there whether he was saying he owns this Gukurahundi thing and the Chiefs owns the Chiefs Council as well, or he and the Chiefs Council own the Gukurahundi thing. I think the moment we speak like that, it doesn't show sincerity. It somehow projects a certain narrative that we alone are going to direct what is done and what cannot be done. And also, just generally, the President himself was not very conciliatory in some of the language, some of the things that were said, like there are people who are detractors, and also this program will not be about grievances. I think Gukurahundi is the biggest grievance in Zimbabwe. We cannot set it off by framing it as a program where grievances are not going to be part of the program. I think launch the program and then ask the communities themselves, the individuals, the victims, the families, what it is that they want, and then take it from there.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mpofu.
Welcome to your presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. The topic is Zimbabwe ready to solve Gukurahundi? So what does it mean to solve Gukurahundi? In my considered view, solving Gukurahundi means bringing about truth and justice for the victims of Gukurahundi for three reasons. One, to foster lasting healing for the victims of Gukurahundi in order to close their still open wounds. Two, to foster lasting national reconciliation in order to close the Gukurahundi chapter as a national question. And lastly, in my view, it means to engender, bring about lasting national cohesion, unity, peace, and development in the country. In my considered view, to resolve Gukurahundi can be best determined by a three-pronged test, which has three questions. Does the generality of the public, especially in and among the affected community, palpably feel that the issue is indeed being resolved or will be resolved? Those our comrades who are involved in the community outreach program need to ask themselves this. They cannot afford to have another secret process behind the scenes. They cannot afford to have a process that is driven by bureaucrats or deep state people, because the nation knows that there was a serious effort in history, such as the Chihambakwe Commission, which was never made public, and whose report is said to be missing and cannot be found. So this, it needs to be the first test. Is what we are doing giving the public, especially the affected community, the confidence that they now palpably feel that the issue is indeed being resolved or will be resolved? Secondly, does the state or government, but the state itself, does it palpably have nothing to fear or hide about Gukurahundi? We all know about official state secrets, and we all know that some of these secrets have a longevity of not less than 30 years and so forth. Sometimes issues that have happened and that are covered by such things leave the state with something to fear or to hide, fear and hide on grounds that if it comes out, there will be disharmony, there will be fights, and public disorder and so forth. So the question has to be asked in order to test whether we are ready as a country to get into this. Does the state have something to still have something to fear or hide about Gukurahundi? If the answer is no, then we are ready. If the answer is yes, maybe the spirit is willing, but the flesh is unable to do it. Lastly, is Zimbabwe itself as a country ready? Ready as a country to deal with a Gukurahundi? This should not be answered subjectively on the basis of political or moral sentiments, but it should be answered objectively on the basis of a reasonable person's standpoint, to do an objective test. Are we? When you hear us discuss this as Zimbabweans, the way we slip into tribalism and all these issues and so forth would give a visitor from Mars the impression that as a country we are not yet ready. But I think the fact that a green light has been given for us to discuss openly and so forth, and some significant ice has been broken, means that we also as a society are very close to be ready, but we need to engage each other without fear or favor. Even if people are talking nonsense about tribalism and so forth, let's engage each other. I conclude by saying we are not yet ready, but we are almost there. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show for this Wednesday edition, man. From myself, Brighton Ngube.
And Nonhlanhla Mapigwa.
It's bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode. For feedback, you can contact us on 263-777-470017. Don't forget to follow and like our social media pages.